All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Annie Tillman. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator here at the Schaumburg Library. Tonight, we're really excited to have Joan Davis with us to talk about grains, greens, and beans, and promising research and successful strategies for whole food, plant-based nutrition. So if you have any questions throughout the duration of this program, please feel free to put them into our chat box or use the Q&A box, and then I will pop back on screen at the end of the program to ask those of Joan. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to let Joan take over.
Okay. First, I want to welcome you, and I am a teacher, as my business little notice says. I'm a teacher, and I guess it doesn't say that. I am a nurse, but I've also been a teacher. And being a teacher, I like my audiences to know where we're going. I think that, then you have a better idea. Well, what are we going to be covering? So let's just take a look at that. I'm going to just move this poll. I'm moving my poll so you can read. We're going to talk about the why of whole food plant-based nutrition. But I'm going to start like I like to start with a story. I think most people like to hear stories, and I have one, kind of a personal one, I would like to share with you of recovery and discovery. So we will start with that. And I'm going to go over some definitions. And then I'm going to go into, well, is there a problem? What's the problem with nutrition in the US? We'll then cover just a little bit about, well, if there's a problem, there better be a solution. Joan, you better tell us about the solution. So I will cover that. And I'm going to talk about some really promising research. And then I'm going to talk about answers found in plants themselves. We'll review a little bit about some pioneering physicians who perhaps are saying something a little different than they did 10 years ago, or than maybe your own physician is saying. And then we'll talk about, well, why is it so confusing? Because, Joan, you know what I hear? Coffee's good, coffee's bad. Eggs are good, eggs aren't healthy. Why do they make it so confusing? Well, we'll talk about, there's reasons for that. And then we'll talk about, again, where we're going to go. And that's more kind of the next section, but just a little bit on the how, strategies for success. And for sure, I'm going to give you some resources and sources of support so that, if you say, well, maybe there's something to this, how would I learn more? I'll be giving you lots of tips about that. Okay, I said I'd start with a story. And as I said, it's kind of a personal story. Actually, it's not my story, it's my husband's story. In November of 2013, my husband, a seemingly very healthy, active, non-smoking, average weight man, had a very busy end of the year. He went to Antarctica, did a polar plunge there, jumping into the cold water. And then he went sailing, had a sailing adventure. Then he went scuba diving, where he had to hoist up those heavy oxygen tanks. And then he came home. Well, he had some home time in between. But when he came home, he couldn't keep up with me when we were going on cross-country skiing just around the neighborhood. And I was a little concerned because usually I'm the slow one. And my husband had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, but so many people do. It was well controlled by medicine, but I was going to retire. So I said, being the good nurse, I said, you should check with your cardiologist before we go on this big road trip we were planning. And when he went in to see the cardiologist started yelling at his nurses, which I didn't appreciate. And he was saying, do it again, do it again. And the reason he was saying that is because my husband, as he told my husband, you're either having or had a heart attack. Now, that was a total shock to my husband. And my husband's very calm and collected. And he said, no, I don't think so. But he went ahead and quickly got checked into the hospital. And indeed, we found that 3 of his coronary artery was blocked, and he had a stent within he had a bypass within 24 hours, a triple bypass, which was a total shock to us because we're pretty healthy people. We thought we were pretty healthy people, and he seemed to be doing everything right. We were the healthy people in our group. So that wasn't enough drama as he was recovering, and he was recovering very smoothly. And usually the 4th day after open heart surgery, you go home. But my husband, on the 4th day, early in the morning, and I remember because it was Valentine's Day, his heart stopped. And I read later about 3% of patients who have open heart surgery, their heart stops. Now, this is not scientific, but my theory is the heart says, I've just had enough. So fortunately, he was in the right place at the right time. They quickly resuscitated him, and he got an internal defibrillator, which hasn't been used at all. But we were very discouraged because we thought we were doing everything right. And my twin sister, being a supportive twin sister, came to visit us in the hospital, and she was reading a book because the doctors told us, oh, keep doing everything right. My husband, being an engineer, said, well, what we were doing isn't right. That isn't going so well. So he was discouraged. We thought, what else can we do? And my sister brought in this book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And we said, what kind of a crackpot wrote this book? Because as a nurse, I knew you couldn't reverse heart disease, and I just thought they were kind of playing on our hopes, you know, and I just was very skeptical. But then she said, well, it's from the Cleveland Clinic, and I said, Cleveland Clinic? I know they're a very good heart institute. I have a good heart institute and very well respected. Let me see that book. Well, it didn't take too many pages before I found the angiograms that showed that Dr. Caldwell Esselton was able to reverse heart disease with a very aggressive diet approach. Well, that was news to me. I'd been a nurse for 20 years teaching health promotion, and I'd not heard about, you know, aggressive nutrition approach. So we decided, well, what have we got to lose? Let's learn more. We went out to the Cleveland Clinic and, quite frankly, changed our eating habits, which weren't that bad, but we stopped eating a lot of processed foods. I started spending more time in the kitchen, so a little bit more home cooking, and also no animal products. Okay, and quite frankly, if they would have told me, well, your husband will live, but you need to eat cardboard the rest of your life, I probably would have said, well, can I have mustard on that? You know, it was just, we thought it'd be we'd really be deprived. Oh golly, no more animal products. That means no cheese. What are we gonna do? But we want them to live, so we'll do it. Well, as it turned out, we discovered a whole world of greens and grains and beans that we didn't know anything about, or very little. We hadn't enjoyed. And it turns out now 4 years later, we're doing just fine. Both lost about 20 pounds. That was unexpected. And my husband is thriving. And I then went and got a certificate in plant-based nutrition to learn more about how come I didn't know about this research before. So I tell you this not because I want you to say, oh, well, the nurse and her husband did this and maybe I should change my eating habits. No, I never want anyone to make decisions about nutrition. It's such an important decision about your nutrition to base it on anecdote. And although my anecdote, I think, is it's convincing to me, I don't want you to be convinced. I want you to be looking at research, and then you decide, is there anything to this research? So I tell my story, again, not to convince you to eat in any special way. I want people to make decisions on evidence. And because of that, I'm going to tell you about 12 different research studies, and then I will be giving you the details and links to those studies, so you can then decide, is there something to this? Do I want to learn a little bit more? But so many people ask me, well, why are you so passionate about whole food plant-based? And I think it's a reasonable question, and that's why I divulge this and give you this little story to start with. But let's get started. I think I've been throwing out the term whole food plant-based? So I think we should start with a few definitions. And the first one is vegetarian. Oh, you know that, right? Vegetarian is someone who doesn't eat meat. And that includes fish and chicken, by the way, flesh, animal flesh. Vegan, now that's someone who only eats or does not eat any animal products. And then plant-based whole food, the third, so no meat, no animal products. And then if we say whole food plant-based, that's no animal products or processed foods or minimal processed foods. Now you might be saying, oh, Joan, what does that leave to eat? And I'll tell you, there's lots of very good foods that are still available. We don't think of it so much as getting rid of, but substituting and eating other foods. So it's not so much about eliminating foods as substituting. I should mention, you can eat miserably as a vegan. You can eat a lot of processed foods, and that's why you see sometimes vegans and certainly vegetarians who are quite overweight. They're still eating a lot of high-fat foods like cheese. Vegans wouldn't eat the cheese, but they could be eating a lot of Oreo cookies or candy bars. Yeah, they're 100% plant-based, or they're not no animal products, but they're not whole food. So with that in mind, let's just take a look. This is I like it. Dean Ornish developed this. It's considered a food spectrum. And what we have here is nutrient-dense foods over on the far right. Those are healthy foods, low in calories, high in nutrients. And then, of course, on the other side, we got high fat, high sugar, and refined foods. And you might want to consider where you are right now. You don't have to, think about it too hard, but just kind of, are you more over on the left here, or on the left, or are you on the right? I'm not talking politically, folks. Okay, let's take a look at the, what does the FDA, what does the government say in terms of what's a good diet? Well, this is what the latest, now we're going to be getting a new food guidelines, but the one that we have now, the recommendations, food guidelines are half your plate should be fruits and vegetables, half should be grains, and of that half of your plate, half should be whole grains. And then the recommendation is vary your protein, not just animal protein, have some plant protein, and decrease salt, sugar, and fat, especially saturated fat. Now, how well do Americans do? Well, let's take a look. That's the guidelines, and we call that the standard American, the standard American diet is not this because people do not follow those guidelines. Here's more where most Americans are. Way over to the left, high fat, high sugar, refined foods. And our poor dietary guidelines, we wish more people would eat like that. This is where most people are. Now, and again, you kind of can think, am I following the guidelines or maybe not? Do you get that many vegetables? Half your plate? So think about where you're eating is on the spectrum, and maybe you're happy where it's at. But let's take a look at what most Americans, how is that working out for being in the high fat, high sugar? Well, this is US food consumption as a percentage of calories. And we see, if you took it at like a pizza pie, the biggest piece of the pie, 63%, are processed foods with added fats, oils, sugar, and refined grains. And then you might say, well, Joan, at least a fourth of them are protein foods, animal foods. And animal foods do give you protein, no doubt, but also give you cholesterol, because cholesterol is only found in animal foods. And they're also a primary source of saturated fat. And then you say, well, okay, but at least 12% are plant foods. And I'd say, well, yes, but half of that, the statistics show half of what Americans eat when they say they eat plant foods are French fries. So what does that leave us? A measly 6% are whole foods, whole plant-based foods. So how is that working out for the average American? Well, let's take a look. That's what the problem is. We're sicker, fatter than ever. And I'm sorry for that graphic, but it makes it pretty clear. According to the executive summary of the 2015 dietary guidelines, we're not doing so well. Half of Americans have one or more preventable chronic diet-related condition, like diabetes or cardiovascular disease or obesity. Now, about now, you might be thinking, well, Joan, you've really depressed me. Is it just a matter of time and I'm going to end up like some of those other folks I just saw? Well, certainly the diseases I talked about, diabetes and heart disease, certainly there are other conditions related to nutrition that we certainly want to avoid. And you don't want to be thinking sooner or later I'm going to be diagnosed. But here's the good news, and that's what I really want to share with you. Growing old does not mean that you'll be growing sick. And despite what maybe your neighbors say or you're thinking, genes are not your destiny. You might say, well, why do you say that? Based on what you're telling me, I kind of assumed that was the case. Well, I'm going to share with you some research, 12 studies, and I think that those will be very encouraging to you. Now, I want to give you an idea of the depth and the variety of these research studies, and that confirm that eating a more whole food, plant-based diet does have health benefits. Most Americans aren't aware of such research. I know I wasn't, and I taught health promotion for 20 years. So I'm assuming you might not be aware of this research, and it's exciting research. I think it's important to understand that there is hope for healthy aging and minimal risk of developing chronic disease. I think if you understand the why, and that's what this program is all about, why, then you can decide, is it worth it to eat differently than most, and perhaps differently than you've been eating all your life? So I've got 12 research studies for you to consider. Now, before you groan and you might think, oh, she likes research, but I'm not that excited about it. I'm going to make it real easy for you. I'm going to give you 12 studies, but I'm going to count them out, and we'll kind of keep a countdown, and I have lots of graphics to make it a little easier to understand the research. So are you ready to put your researcher's cap on? Okay, here goes the 12 studies, and we're going to start with one you may have heard before, the blue zone. I actually do a whole program on the blue zone, but I'm going to explain or review it real quickly for you. And the blue zones are places in the world where people live extraordinarily long lives. And what we found is that there are certain, we call them pockets of longevity. And National Geographic actually has had a couple of articles. Actually, it was their cover story back in, I think it was 2015, explaining about these blue zones. The author was Dan Buettner, and he has like 5 bestsellers now on the blue zones. But bottom line, what they showed is there are places where people don't have those chronic conditions that we have. And they were very scientific about looking at what are their habits, diet and otherwise. And you can see we do have a blue zone in the US, in Loma Linda, California. Now, if you're in the medical field, you probably have heard of these studies. They're called the Seventh-day Adventist studies, because Seventh-day Adventists live in Loma Linda, and that is a growing Protestant sect. Most Seventh-day Adventists live outside the U.S., but there are about 30,000 who live in Loma Linda, 30,000 residents, and about half of those are Seventh-day Adventists. And they practice very different nutrition and lifestyle than the rest of the folks around in LA. And I won't go into all the details, but I will just say the research about blue zones looked at, well, what are they eating? What are they doing? And they came up with several characteristics. What do they all have in common? I mean, when you look at it, some people are living in Italy, some in Costa Rica, some in Greece, and then those folks away in Okinawa. What are they doing that they manage to live such long but healthy lives? Well, here it is. Here were those 7 characteristics. Now, some have nothing to do with nutrition, family connections, social engagements, less smoking, and constant moderate activity. But two of the 7 involved nutrition. They were semi-vegetarian. Majority of the food that they ate came from plants. They may have eaten meat occasionally on special occasions or just as a short part of their meal or a couple times a week. And then they also ate tons of legumes or beans. And that was kind of a finding. We know in the US, we don't eat nearly the amount of legumes or beans. And apparently it's a pretty healthy thing to do. So that was our first indication, or one of the first study to say, there may be something to this whole food, plant-based diet that is healthy. Let's take a look at the next study. And this is, you might have heard the China study, or if you haven't heard of the China study, maybe you've heard forks over knives. That was a very popular video that was made. And I understand it's available at the Schomburg Library as well. But the video or DVD that it was based on, this book, the China study, although the DVD is called Forks Over Knives, meaning forks, food, over knives, meaning scalpels. In other words, nutrition versus surgery. Okay. Now, the China study looked at chronic diseases, and especially cancer and cardiovascular disease in different populations. So it was an epidemiology study, or it looked at population groups, but then they also backed it up with lab studies. I should say it was mostly T. Colin Campbell, a very well-known scientist in the field of nutrition. And then he had his son help him with writing this book. And what they concluded is that the closer people came to consuming an all plant-based diet, the lower their risk for chronic degenerative diseases so common in the West. Well, what did they base that on? Well, actually, it was a huge study. I think it was the New York Times called it the most comprehensive nutritional study ever conducted. And what's special is not only the fact that it was a huge amount of data, but it was an opportunity to really compare plant versus animal-based diets. It involves 6,500 adults in counties across China, and then comparing those people who ate more wheat versus other sources of plant-based diets, and then comparing the plant-based diets in China compared to our American diet. Now, what they learned is the Chinese ate less protein and less total protein from animal sources. In fact, they ate 70%, in the US, we eat 70% of our protein is animal, and in China, it's 10%. But they were doing something right because they were living long, healthy lives. And that was consistent with other studies and lab results. Now, our animal protein in the average diet is about 10 times greater than in rural China. So what they were doing is just looking at patterns of disease associated with radically different US and Chinese diet. Dr. Campbell had a great study design. He is an excellent researcher. He rigorously reviewed and published in prestigious peer-reviewed medical journals. Bottom line, it was top-notch research. And that was good because the findings were surprising and they needed to be scrupulously verified. Dr. Campbell had a dairy farming background, and he believed, like most Americans, that animal protein is especially good for humans. But what he learned was too much animal protein can have harmful effects. And this was the first big study to demonstrate this. But being a good researcher, Dr. Campbell, after doing the China study, and he was in China to do that, he came home and he followed up with lab studies. And what he did, let me get to the next screen here, he gave lab rats varying amounts of animal protein. And the protein that he was using was casein, which is found in milk and cheese. If you look on cheese products, often it'll say contains casein. And what he did is he said, okay, we're going to take rats that have early cancer clusters. And then we're going to give them dairy protein that's 20%. The dairy protein is 20% in their diet. And we'll do that at 3 weeks. And then over the next 3 weeks, we're going to drop that protein down, animal protein, to 5%. And then we're going to add that protein up again, build it up again to 20. And then we'll drop it down. He was turning cancer on and off, turning the tumors on and off by varying the amount of protein. And this was kind of earth-shaking, that could you really do this? And he did confirm that even small intakes of foods of animal origin increases chronic degenerative disease mortality rates. Now, does that mean that one rat could, do fine? No, again, it's trends. When you do this kind of work, you're looking at trends. And but it was a really big news, and that's why it got such publicity and was written up in the book and now in the Forks Over Knives. So that was study number 2. Remember, study number 1 was blue zones. This was study 2. We're moving right along. We're on 3 already. This is a study, nutritional research focusing on immigrants. And this one's probably going to be a little easier for you to understand because you've probably seen it yourself. You could start with, if you've seen immigrants, they usually come to the United States, usually young, healthy, active. But you know what? The longer they stay, the worse they fare. Not everybody, but in general, the trends show that once they adopt the Western dietary habits, their risk of having diabetes, type 2 diabetes or obesity definitely increase. Now, if they keep with their old diet, if they don't adopt the American diet, that doesn't happen. So it's pretty telling research, and there are a lot of studies that have been, very scientific about it. I mean, we might just kind of know some folks that came as immigrants and then they gain weight, but this was, studies that did it in a more systematic way to show that. Okay, so we're now up to our 4th research study. And these are kind of interesting epidemiology studies. What we look at is animal protein and fat intake. Over here, this would be the diet. And up here, this is not where we want to go. We do not want to go having higher breast cancer. And we'll take a look. Let's see where the US is. Here we are. We eat quite a bit of animal protein and fat. And my golly, we're way high in the statistics compared to other countries. If we look at a country like Thailand or El Salvador, they don't eat very much animal protein and have limited fat intake. They may have other health measures that aren't good, but in this case, they don't have any, they have minimal animal protein fat intake. And look at where they are in terms of breast cancer, much lower. Then maybe we look at someone like someone in Spain. Well, generally, the Spanish diet includes not a whole lot of animal protein, but more than El Salvador. And again, the breast cancer increases. We can take a look at this line for an indication. Now, we're not the worst country. You got Canada, Denmark, New Zealand. Those countries eat even more animal protein and fat. And they even have higher breast cancer rates. So this was kind of telling. Again, it's just one indication, what does whole food plant-based, how does it fare if we start studying it? Bottom line, the higher the consumption of animal protein and fat intake, which is the line along the bottom, the higher the rate of breast cancer, which is again along the left side. So now we're up to number 5. Are you ready? This is kind of a similar study with kind of a scary name, plant food consumption and versus the killer diseases. Now, the killer diseases were considered heart disease and cancer in this study. And what we see, again, we're looking at the US diet compared to other countries' diet. And over here, we do not want to be here because this is killer. It's mortality. So you don't want to be close to percentage of deaths from heart disease and cancer. So you don't want to be high up here. You want to be low, like Laos. And then and that's the orange. Yeah, the orange. Now the green is percentage of calories from unrefined plant foods. We are not doing real well. We don't have a whole lot of unrefined plant foods that we're eating. Let's compare to Portugal. They eat a little bit more. Who are the people who are eating a lot of refined plant foods? Again, Thailand, Laos, they eat a lot more unrefined plant foods. And look at where they stand as far as heart disease and cancer, much lower. So again, the relationship here is the higher the consumption of unrefined plant foods, the lower the rate of killer diseases. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I told you we try to go fast here. Have you heard of this term, insulin-like growth factor 1? It's abbreviated, the acronym is IGF-1, and it's been in the news quite a bit. And basically, IGF-1 is a primary dietary factor that determines, it is determined by the amount of animal protein you eat. And the problem with IGF-1 is that it, as it says, it causes growth. Now, growth can be a great thing if you're a little boy, or if you're a little boy or girl, or if you're pregnant, but it's not so good if we're adult. And here's what happens. When the body gets a whole load of protein, the body kind of says, whoa, look at all this protein. What am I going to do with it? We can't just waste it. It's good protein. We got to grow. So it sends out this insulin-like growth factor, telling body parts, especially cells, it's growing time, go crazy. Look how much excess protein we've got to work with. And the problem is some of these new growths that are spurred are tumors and the blood vessels associated with it, which help the tumors to grow. Now, again, when you're a kid, that's great because we need to grow. But when you're an adult, it's not so good. When you're fully grown adult, cell growth is something that we want to slow down, not accelerate. The goal, therefore, would be, we need to grow a little bit. And the goal is to maintain adequate but not excessive overall protein intake, which is why there are many studies now confirming that too much animal protein is associated with all kinds of health problems. The studies are important because they challenge what most Americans think. Man, we have outdated assumptions that the more the better when it comes to protein, and we're learning that is not so at all. Okay, so we are now over half done with our looking at research. Here's one that you might think is kind of interesting. I think it's rather interesting because what they did, the Vogel study, there was a Mr. Vogel, and in 1999, using research methods, he fed subjects a high-fat meal, and then he measured what happened. And a lot of the subjects were college students who were quite happy to be fed a cheeseburger and French fries and get paid for it. And all they had to do was just have measurements in the arm. Now that looks like a blood pressure cuff. It's not quite. It's a flow-mediated dilation that they're measuring, but it's similar to a blood pressure cuff. And what it shows is how your blood vessels dilate. Once you squeeze them and cut off circulation a little bit, then how do the blood vessels respond? And as it turns out, after a traditional meal of hamburgers and fries or cheesecake, the dilation, the ability of the blood vessels to dilate, which helps your blood flow, it's crucial to your good cardiovascular function. It's impaired after a high-fat meal. And I have to tell you, the bad news is then he tried it with olive oil, and they've done these experiments over and over again. Same thing happens. The dilation is slowed down. Eventually your body recovers, but there's a 3-hour decline in the flow-mediated dilation. And that's not a good thing for our cardiovascular systems. We need our blood vessels to dilate, and fat impairs that. And then if we have another high-fat meal 3 hours later, we're continually not allowing good blood flow. So that's the Vogel study. And again, olive oil, unfortunately, did the same thing. Yes, it's plant-based, but it's still high in fat. Okay, so that's the 7th study. Let's look at the 8th study. The 8th study is kind of an interesting one. I'm trying to give you all a variety of research. This one, what they did is they said, well, we're learning more and more about the gut microbiome. And what we found is that there are little microbes in our gut that are much more active than we thought. And apparently they seem to like soluble fiber. So what they found is, when we study vegans, and again, vegan in this case is referring to healthy plant-based eaters. When we study what kind of bacteria do vegans have in their stomachs versus what kind of bacteria do people who eat the standard American diet, what kind of bacteria do they have? What we've learned is that the vegan gut profile appears to be unique in several characteristics, and it includes a much better percentage of protective species, good bacteria, in other words. So this was kind of an interesting study. It was looking at the cells themselves, or the microbes, I should say, cells themselves. This has to do with, if you have bad bacteria in your gut microbiome, you may have a lot of inflammation. And a lot of times what we see is high bacterial load in raw or cooked animal foods causes inflammation. And you might say, well, Joan, once you cook bacteria, that takes care of it, doesn't it? Well, we're finding it doesn't. It's, raw, certainly raw animal foods are bad, and most people don't do that. But even cooked, it can send out, once it's cooked, it can send out, or I should say, it affects the body in ways that still can be harmful. And then we get all these awful conditions that we don't want, and it affects the whole body, from your eyes to your toes. Certainly we understand obesity and how it might affect diabetes, but did you think in terms of gum disease? What we found is inflammation from high bacterial load in the abdominal or in the GI tract can cause gum disease, cardiovascular disease, eye disorders. You can read the whole list, and it's growing. So, it's a big concern, and we want good gut bacteria that can fight this inflammation. Okay, our next study is one, heart disease. And what happened here is that they took people who had heart disease, and then they said, okay, we're going to do a study with them. Now, you can't give somebody heart disease, but you can look at, well, those who have had a heart disease, what's the likelihood they're going to have another one? That's what this Lion diet heart study was all about. And it was a big study, 600 folks who had had their first heart attack. And what they did is they had two groups, a control group that basically the doctor said, well, kind of keep everything the same, and we'll see what happens. They got general healthy advice, but this experimental group got much different advice. They were told, you need to eat less saturated fat and cholesterol. You need to eat more plant-based omega-3s, which means more bread and fruit and less deli meat and meat in general, less butter and cream. They were given pretty strict advice about what they should be eating. And then they followed them for many years. So the control group got no dietary advice apart from what their doctors told them. And the experimental group was told to eat kind of a Mediterranean diet. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm going to get back where we were. Here we go. The Mediterranean diet was, let me see, I've just lost my screen here, but I'm going to get back to it. Well, I will excuse me. Well, I'll just talk from here. What happened is the diet, low in the diet that the folks following the Mediterranean diet was low in saturated fat, and they found it could cut heart attack risk by 75%. So it was amazing how well it protected the protected from having a second heart attack. And I don't know about you, but if I had a heart attack, I think I'd be wanting to make sure I could do everything possible to avoid having a second one. So, okay, we're now up to double digits. We've got the 10th of 12. Remember, we're aiming for a dozen. Here's the 10th one. And this has to do with meat consumption. And what the study showed, the first one was put in Lancet, Carcinogenity of consumption of red and processed meat. This was from the famous Harvard study. And it was a huge study, involved, let me see how many, I'll tell you exactly, 500,000 people. And they looked at their diet for 10 years. This was only men. And what their conclusion was, meat eating is positively associated with increased overall mortality, increased heart disease mortality, and increased cancer mortality. So this was a big study. And again, it came out in 2015. Now, you've also, I'm sure, heard of the International Agency on Cancer, Research on Cancer, which classified meat as a carcinogen. So we're looking at meat in terms of two risk factors, cancer mortality, heart disease mortality, and overall mortality. Okay, and I've given you the sources for those two studies if you wanted to look at it a little bit more. Okay, we're getting almost done here. This is a different kind of study. What they did is looked at, it was called an in vivo study, meaning involved with the cells, in this case, particularly cancer cells. And what they did is they took cancer cells, put them in a lab, a petri dish or something, and then they dripped the blood of people eating different diets on the cancer cells. Now, if our bodies are pretty, try to help heal us naturally, anything that, any kind of diet should bring slow the growth of cancer cells. And in this case, the standard American diet, when you put that on top of, the blood of people eating the standard American diet on top of the cancer cells, it did stop the growth, 9%. But if you took vegans, again, healthy vegans, and put the vegan blood on top of that same cancer cells, it stopped it by 70%. So again, if you're dealing with cancer, this study is pretty promising. Let's go to the very last one. You've stuck with me. We're almost done. And that, I've told you a little bit about this one. I'm sorry, I got this one mixed up. Let's go to this one. And that is angiogenesis. And angiogenesis is basically, remember I told you that the IGF-1 can increase the growth of blood vessels. Technically, that's called angiogenesis, and it's an exciting brand new field of research. If you're interested in learning more about this, I think the best way is there's a wonderful TED Talk. If you do listen to TED Talks, if you just go in the search bar and type in the word angiogenesis. Angio means vessel, and genesis means development of. So development of blood vessels. You'll see how they're really thinking that this is kind of the cause or associated with all kinds of the chronic diseases that we want to avoid, like arthritis, heart disease. You can see all of the plagues of getting old have to do with angiogenesis. So, and what we found is there are certain foods that are anti-angiogenesis. Mushrooms, I know, are one. There are other kinds of foods. So we want to know that, and they're plant-based foods. They seem to have the ability to stop that growth. So again, a new study. Now, about now you may be saying, I am researched. I am up to here with research, and I understand. I could have just given you this The weight of evidence strongly supports a diet of minimally processed foods, close to nature, predominantly plants, which is what the annual review of public health said. Or another way of putting this is what, who is it? One of the plant-based doctors, his response is, don't eat processed crap. I mean, that's pretty graphic, but that's what he says. And he says juice and sugar, soda are sugar, choose real foods. Okay, but another study, to be a little more scientific, was the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And they said plant-based eating is exemplified by low rates of obesity, coronary disease, diabetes, and many cancers. All the protective effects were observed for foods of plant origin, while the hazardous effects were correlated with meat intake. So I could have just given you these two, but if you were like me, I would have said, show me the science. You know, I want to see something that really proves that. And that's why I went through the trouble of showing you the 12 studies. Now, if you really want to get into it, Kaiser Permanente does a lot of research on plant-based nutrition. And what they said is plant-based diets are associated with, and then they have studies. So if you look this group study up, you'll see, well, what does it help with? And you can see almost all the diseases of mankind, they're less likely to happen or less severe with a plant-based diet. You know, all these numbers here, I'm just giving you, it's the wealth of information in the study to show how plant-based diets are studied. So there's lots of research now about plant-based nutrition. Okay, but or you could just go with what American Medical Association said. And this is from JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association. And they looked at a huge study, 131,342 participants, and they looked at animal and plant protein. And then what did they say? Well, what's the association of the source of protein intake with mortality? High intake of animal protein, positively associated with mortality. Inverse true for plant protein. Okay, meaning public health recommendations should focus on improvement of protein sources to plants. Okay, but again, you might be saying, Joan, enough research. Let's just look at the plants themselves. And what we can do is just, okay, what do plants do for you? Well, they give you vitamins and minerals. We knew that. They give protein, probably surprisingly. Did you know even lettuce, any plant will give you a certain percentage of protein. And some quite a bit of protein, certainly the beans. But plants give you fiber, and we're learning we need more and more fiber. Plants give us antioxidants, which helps us fight cancer. Plants give us phytochemicals, and we're just learning there's thousands of these chemicals out there. And they, we don't have them on labels because you'd have this huge long list on your package. But what we do know is the ones that we know a little bit more about, like beta carotene and lycopene and curcumin, all of those that have been studied, they're found in plants. They are not found in animals. What do you find in animals? Cholesterol. No cholesterol in plants. Saturated fats, no saturated fats in most plants, except for like coconut oil. Well, coconut oil and a few other rare plants, but very rare. Harmful additives, plants don't have harmful additives unless we add them. If we take a perfectly healthy potato and then we add a lot of salt and oil, then it does have harmful additives. Another way we could do this is just look at the one plant itself. Let's pick spinach. Okay, what has spinach got in it? Whoops, I went too fast and now I want to go back. Sorry about that. Previous, we want previous, and then we want previous. I really want us to look at, here's what's in spinach. Calcium, chlorine, chlorine, copper, fiber, folate, iron. I don't have to read them all to you, but look at that many in just one little bowl of spinach. You're getting so many vitamins and minerals, but the fiber as well, and those phytonutrients. Okay, so we've talked about research that seems to say plant-based is really the way to go for health, plant-based whole food. And then we've looked at the plants themselves and seen they seem to have a lot to offer. Another source of the good news, remember I told you, you don't have to develop some of these chronic conditions, or at least you can cut your risk. And the good news that I gave you is the research that's being done now, the plants themselves, and then also some doctors who didn't follow mainstream, and they really did more research, and they're inspiring because they are available. Now, there are some plant-based doctors in the Chicago area, but what I'd encourage you to do is just, you can read some books. We could start, one of the pioneering clinicians was Nathan Pritikin. And a lot of people remember him because he wrote a book. He was much more into longevity, but he wrote a book on longevity, but turns out the people who practiced or did his diet, they all lost weight. So became known, he was much more popular because he could, encourage and show results of weight loss. But he was basically a nutritionist and longevity researcher, and fondly remembered because a lot of these other doctors then took his research and then, worked on their own. Now, Dr. Mcdougall is another, and he's written books. All these doctors that pretty much have written books, and they're easily available in your libraries. This one is the Starch Solution, but Dr. Mcdougall has lots of other books, and he promotes whole food plant-based. Dr. Neil Bernard, he's wonderful. He is associated with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. He has several books out. His latest has to do with cheese and cheese addiction. This doctor is kind of interesting because he was a celebrity weight loss doctor because he did a lot of gastric bypasses, stomach surgery, stomach stapling, and he discovered that a lot of those people, excuse me, I didn't mean to move along quite so fast previous, a lot of the people that he was treating, they just went ahead and gained more weight. So surgery wasn't the answer, and he started studying himself because he started gaining a lot of weight. And now he's written a book, Proteinaholic, How Our Obsession with Meat is Killing Us and What We Can Do About It. Another doctor who's big in this plant-based movement, oops, I skipped him over. Well, that was Dr. Joel Fuhrman. Another doctor you may have heard of, Dr. Dean Ornish. He's the one who treated former President Bill Clinton. Ornish has been around a long time. He's put in his, he's done his research. He's worked 35 years in research. And in 2010, he was the first doctor whose program on nutrition and lifestyle was covered under Medicare. And you can actually go out and enroll in his program, and it shows. Let's see. Oops, I want the next one. His research shows that he has proven studies showing reversal of heart disease, reversal of diabetes, not to mention reversal of some cancers actually, and not to mention, of course, weight loss. So he's quoted a lot, and he's also, a lot of studies have been done now since his initial programs. Okay, let's go to the next. Now, this is a doctor that I feel like was so helpful to my husband. He also was helpful to Bill Clinton when he was president. And here are those famous angiograms showing how a diet can open up those important coronary blood vessels. Okay, so that's Dr. Caldwell Esselton, and he wrote the book Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Okay, now I've kind of introduced you to several doctors. Here's one of my favorites. I actually volunteer for this website that Dr. Michael Greger has. He's written this bestseller, How Not to Die, in which he looks at all plant-based research and then shows how it can affect all different conditions, from prostate cancer to arthritis, etc. I don't particularly like the title, but Great book, very scholarly. Dr. Greger's motto is "Show me the science," and I would encourage you to keep this website in mind, nutritionfacts.org, right here. Nutritionfacts.org is a great website, very science-based. But he's kind of funny. He could be a stand-up comic if he weren't a doctor focusing on plant-based nutrition. So you might want to look at his website. Thousands of videos. There it is. Okay, now, plant-based eating, I think, is going mainstream. A lot more people are saying, well, I'm interested in becoming vegetarian, or I'm vegan, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's mainstream yet. There's been, you can see in the lines of milk and plant-based and cheese, you've got a lot more plant-based options, but it's still not the majority. And as I told my husband, something's going mainstream, towards mainstream, when you get these kind of books, Plant-Based Diet for Dummies or The Idiot's Guide to Plant-Based Nutrition. Both of these are pretty good resources, especially this one, written by a very respected dietitian. Lots of research went into that book. So despite the title, it's a good book. Okay, but I said we should talk a little bit about why it's so confusing. And there's a whole lot of misinformation out there. And a lot of times research studies are, what's in the research studies is very different than what's in the headlines. For example, when this study came out, or a study came out, and it seemed that people who ate butter were healthier. But then when they looked at it a little closer, it never said that at all. What it said is, we don't have enough research to stay with the cholesterol guidelines that the dietary guidelines said they initially put out a limit. And the study group said, we really can't say there's a limit. We don't know enough. We need more research. However, once that came out, the headlines, eat butter, scientists labeled fat the enemy. Why they were wrong? They were never wrong. And the authors of that study that these people were quoting said, we never said that at all. We just said we didn't have enough research to say there was a specific number. But that's why you can't take your information from scientists. And I like to kind of end by saying, when you see something that seems like it's saying, oh, you can eat your butter, your bacon, enjoy the cheese, ask a lot of questions. Ask what the author's background is. Big deal. Are they selling something? Is this sponsored by the meat and dairy industry? Are the conclusions well reasoned? I have a sheet that kind of gives you all these questions. And I think it's really important to look at the studies, look at the science. This article is a rough guide to spotting bad science. And some people do pseudoscience. They use science to convince you of a point, but it's not true science. It's not really an objective look at the research. That's why I like to give you actual studies. Okay, we could go on and on. People like quick answers, and a lot of times nutrition can be complex. Our bodies are complex. So sometimes we want the quick answers. We want the pills, we want the supplements rather than the whole food, which is harder to study. It's easier to study medications and pills, but a lot of times there's complex interactions of foods that we need to be a little more careful about how we look at nutrition. We also need to know there's a lot of money in food, and big food corporations are the ones who have the money for advertising and doing some of this fake science. Millions of marketing goes into luring you to eat foods that can make you sick. And after all, the food companies are not in business to make you healthy or to keep you healthy. They're in to make money. And a lot of times it's the processed foods that are much bigger money makers for them than whole foods. You ever hear of big broccoli, big beet? No, because they don't make money. Okay. And then we have to remember that sometimes talking to your physician, they may not have training in nutrition, or excuse me, talking to your doctors, they may not have training in nutrition. What are doctors generally trained in? The surgery, the medications. So I'm not saying don't listen to your doctor, but I'm saying sometimes you need maybe additional information and consider how they've been trained. Consider sometimes the policies. That's why we have terrible food in our school lunch programs, because there's a lot of lobbying, a lot of politics in the food with the food manufacturing. And finally, it's confusing because, by golly, we like to read studies that let us keep believing what we want to believe. And, then we pay attention to those studies. So it's no wonder it's challenging to make smart nutritional decisions. I'm going to end here with asking, where do you fall on the nutrition spectrum? And where would you like to fall? That's really up to you. I can't tell you, and I don't want to tell you what to eat. I can tell you, here's what the science shows. And I do have a program on, well, how would I do this? Because a lot of people say, yeah, it makes more sense to eat more plants and less processed foods, but I don't know how to do that. Joan, I could never give up meat, or I have to have my cheese. And then, in the how-to, I'd say, well, have you tried any of the plant-based meats? Have you ever tried plant-based cheeses? Oh, you don't even know how to get one? Where are they located? What do they have in them? Or you might say, well, I can't eat more beans because it gives me gas. And then I'd say, well, there's ways to take care of that. So I think what I've done tonight is talk about the why, but there's a lot to be said with the how, because if you feel like, yes, I could move a little bit over to the right, a little healthier foods, but I don't know how, then that's more than, there are lots of resources I'm going to give you about how you can transition. Right now, we focus on the how, because that's, the why. That seemed to be the most basic. And then we can talk about, well, how would you do that? And as I said, I'm going to give you lots of support here. Now, those of you, if you have cameras and you want to take a picture of some of these sites, here's transition resources. And we could take these and put these in a link for you. Or again, if it's easier for you to just take it, or maybe there's just one you're interested in. Here's one through PCRM, that's Physician Center for Responsible Medicine. It's a Kickstart program. It would take you by the hand and give you advice if you say, well, I want to go more whole food plant-based. Or Forks Over Knives. They have a great how-to plant-based primer. There's all kinds of programs like this on the internet. If you just go to Forks Over Knives, you'll get lots of resources right there. And again, here's that nutrition facts that I've mentioned. But wait, I'm not done yet. Here's the next one. Here's some books. And these are the books that nicely have been, you'll be at least advised what might be available in the Schomburg Library. And some of them are pretty basic. They're going to be around. They're ones I've mentioned. Forks Over Knives, Forks Over Knives Plan, which is a wonderful book that that's the how-to. This is the why, this is the how-to. And then I mentioned the Complete Idiot's Guide to Plant-Based Nutrition. I mentioned Dr. Michael Greger. He's got a new book out now. You know what he did? He took the T off of How Not to Die, and he's written a great book, very scholarly, How Not to Diet. Okay, so here was How Not to Die, but he also wrote How Not to Diet. And then if you want a real basic book, this guy is a farmer, and he also is a football player, so it appeals to guys, the Plant-Based Diet for Beginners, and he's got some real practical advice. Okay, and Brenda Davis, Becoming Vegan, the complete reference to plant-based nutrition. And again, when she uses the word vegan, she means healthy vegan. Okay, and again, there are lots of other books. Dr. Ornish, Dr. Bernard, Dr. Mcdougall, they're all going to be in the same section in your library. I do have a couple articles. If you say, oh, I don't have time to read a whole book, or I just want to read watch something on the internet, there are several good TED Talks. If you just write Dean Ornish or Mark Bittman, they have some very good TED Talks about nutrition, the plant-based nutrition and the American diet. Okay. Here's that article I gave you, or I mentioned, Spotting Bad Science. And then just in case you want some easy, this is 9 easy ways to eat more plants at every meal. And again, you don't have to copy this whole web address. If you just put this 9 easy ways to eat more plants, I don't even think you need at every meal. You'll be able to pull up that article. If you part of this is looking at food labels. So there are all kinds of articles on the internet, reliable ones. This one I especially like. It's from the FDA, how to read food labels. But you could just type in reading food labels and you'd find it. Okay. So we are now, I should leave this up. I don't know which one would be most helpful to you. Maybe this one with the articles, because those are a little bit longer. And Annie, I think I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see if I can do that right now. Yes. And then we could see, I present a lot of information. So there may be some questions, or maybe it's so overwhelming. No questions, who knows? But I would be happy if we, let's pull up the chat.
So I was able to drop a couple of the things that are available at our library. So those are links to the catalog. If you open up the chat, you can click on those and it'll give you the resources that are related to forks over knives and to the China study. And then as far as the slides, if you want those links directly, I can email those out to program participants and registrants after we wrap up this evening.
Okay. Annie, another thing I could do is send you that one file I have of all the 12 research studies. Now I know not everybody is excited about research as I am, but if someone says, yeah, what's that Vogel study? I want to know more about that. I could send it to you. And if you're going to send other things out, that would just be 12 links to the 12 studies.
Definitely. I'm happy to share that with anybody that is interested. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in that chat box, or using that Q&A box is also an option down on the bottom of your screen. If you're watching on a computer, I'll give you a moment to type. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get questions.
And maybe you're familiar with all this, or all this is something you've never heard of before, so that would be interesting to kind of find out. You don't have to tell me where you are. We say you may be on a plant-based journey. So maybe some of you, you're very happy with where you're at. Other people, well, I started, a year ago, but I'm running into problems. So whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah, we've got our first question. We have somebody wondering how else to eat beans besides in a chili. Are there any good things?
Well, beans and legumes, first of all, if you go with soy yogurt, you're getting beans in. If you like hummus, you're getting chickpeas, you're getting beans. Edamame, you're getting beans. There's lots of ways to, add hummus. You can pretty much have and all kinds of things in sandwiches. I make celery logs, just for a little snack. But those are ways that you can easily get beans. Any soy products are going to be giving you those beans. Lentils, and a lot of people have problems with eating a lot of beans initially. Your body adjusts, but lentils have less of an effect of causing bloating or gas. So a lot of people go with lentils. And now that we have our wonderful Instant Pots, you can make beans. It's fine to have canned beans and, throw those in things. A lot of times with beans, they're so accommodating. You make a big salad, you say, oh, I didn't have any beans today. Well, if you got your can of black beans in the refrigerator, grab, I won't say handful, grab a spoonful and throw them on top of your beans, on your salad. They go very nicely, and it's a quick way to get some beans in. So those are a few ways. There's all kinds of other ways to incorporate beans besides chili, which isn't bad either.
Don't have any additional questions yet. We'll give them another moment.
Okay.
But thank you, Joan. That was really informational, and
there is a lot of information.
Learning more about plant-based. If you are a high-performance competitive athlete, can you get enough protein to keep muscle growing?
You sure can. The answer to that is, and actually, maybe what you'd like to do is Google, and I don't usually say just go to Google. You can go to Google Scholar and you'll get a little bit better information. But did you know that a lot of the elite winning athletes have all turned vegan? Yeah, there are tons of, and when I say vegan, because people know what vegan means, but they're whole food plant-based eaters. So the guy who does, what is his name? I read his book, that does those ultra marathons, like 50 miles and more. Scott Jurek, I think is his name. He is, he's vegan, and he talks a lot about his diet. But there are boxers, there are, in all kinds of sports, they're finding that some of the real champions, some of the really elite athletes have said, you know what, I do better on plant-based diet. And if you can get a chance to watch The Game Changer, that's a movie that came out maybe a year ago. And it was, how they have those special shows, movies. And probably it's on Netflix now, I don't know, but The Game Changer, if you Google it, you might even be able to see a little trailer, and that explains, it's just, it gives stories of athletes who went plant-based and suddenly found they were faster, stronger, amazing progress in their athletic, or improvement in their athletic ability. So Game Changer, I definitely recommend. But if you Google or use Google Scholar and say elite vegan athletes, you'll be amazed that they're the ones taking prizes these days. So a lot of people are paying attention to that.
Very interesting. A comment came in. Thanks for the good information. Thank you.
Glad. You can see I'm a little passionate about this, though. Yeah.
We appreciate it. All right. Last call for questions. And again, thank you so much, Joan. We really appreciate you. And we'll hopefully have you back soon for the how-to portion.
I would love to do that.
Our next question is, assuming water plays a large part to this as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And some people say, if you look at calorie density versus nutrient density, calorie density foods are ones that, like oil or like meat, or could be pies and cakes for the amount. And there's a whole thing about calorie density, but what we find is the more calorie dense it is, the less the water content is, versus foods that are nutrient dense are just the opposite. So when you think of watermelon, it's almost all water. Most plant-based are much higher in water. So, and that's good for us. Fiber and water, and it goes through our body smooth and quickly and gives us the nutrients, but doesn't give us all the extra calories that often lead to weight gain and other problems. So yes, water is real important. That's a big part of it.
All right. Just another moment to see if anybody's typing.
I like your background.
Thank you.
Do most people use your virtual background in the library?
I'm not sure. I know that I do, and our friend Matt does as well.
Well, you see what I have here is just a green board with, but I have seen some people have been using a farmer's market background, virtual background. So I could experiment with that, but I sometimes do my blue zone and then I need to change to blue, so.
Our next question is, how many times a day should we eat?
Oh, that I do a whole program on fasting because so many people are interested in it. And the research is showing you don't have to eat 3 meals a day. Some people get by with 1 meal a day, but the problem is the research is showing eat earlier in the day. You don't have to have breakfast, but eat earlier in the day. Load your calories earlier in the day and then stop. And this is so hard for me because I'm a night owl. Stop eating like about 7. Give your body a fast, even if it's a fast from 7 at night to 7 in the morning, or at least maybe 9 at night. Your body needs a chance to stop that digestion and work on other things. If we are continually eating, as a nurse, I used to tell people, oh, it's really good to graze, you don't need those. No, what we've learned now, there's a whole body of research of what we're learning about chronobiology, our circadian rhythms. And the research is showing that some people get along, not many, but some people get along with eating once a day. 2 times a day works really well for a lot of people. Some people need to eat 3 times a day. And if you're diabetic, maybe you need to eat a little more frequently to have even glucose. But there's no magic answer other than you want to avoid eating later in the day if you're going to have your big meal. And Dr. Greger's book, How Not to Diet, will give you so many research studies to answer that question. So it's a scholarly book. It's about 1,000 pages, and he didn't even put his footnotes. That's in a separate place because, as he said, most people say, you know, write a slim diet book. That's the whole idea. He couldn't do it. He's way too research oriented. But that, I would recommend that book. It's been out now for a while. How Not to Diet. Here it is.
Oh, perfect.
How Not to Diet.
Notes and all.
Yeah. I actually am doing a program now about COVID weight gain because so many people, they call it the pandemic pounds. And I do a lot because he's done such a good job with scholarly, well, what have we learned about dieting? And again, a lot of the things I used to say, I don't say anymore. A calorie is a calorie. Things have changed a lot in our understanding of how the body gains weight. And that's why a lot of people, they really worked hard and they didn't lose weight. Well, there's reasons for it. So it's exciting. And again, things that I've learned that I love sharing. So
excellent. We've got another question and another comment. Someone has heard that eating veggies at night gives more gas. Is that true? And what's your idea on that?
I have not read any studies indicating that. Personal body reactions sometimes can be different. So I would say if that consistently happens to you, most often with the gas, it's just our bodies. If we're not eating very much fiber at all, and then we say, okay, I'm going whole food plant-based and start eating lots of beans, you're going to have gas, you know. So what I'd say with that is it's more a matter of getting your body adjusted. But if you find that consistently, and it depends on how late are you eating. We'd all do better if we digest earlier in the day. So if you're eating your big meal at 10 o'clock, it includes a big serving of beans, and you're having problems with it, you know, you could change that pattern pretty easily. But I haven't seen any research studies, and I've looked at a lot of them about adding beans to your diet, and as far as specific timing.
Excellent. The next comment was, thank you, very informative, and will certainly lean towards more plant-based foods as it makes me feel better and less sluggish.
And you'll be doing your body a favor. Well, ordinarily, if we were in person, I'd try to give you something healthy, like a healthy recipe, or, you know, sometimes we even, okay, you take some purple carrots on the way home, but I don't have anything to give you other than go forth and eat plants. How's that?
Great advice and resources. So I will share those via email for anybody that is interested. And thank you all so much for being here tonight, especially you. Okay. Another comment, very interesting, learned a lot in all caps.
Perfect. I like all caps. I will be sending you those research studies, those 12, Annie, so you'll Perfect. Have those soon. Yeah.
Another comment, thank you so much. Your seminar was very informative.
Well, thank you. Wish we could have done it in person, but that time is coming.
Yep. All right. Stay safe, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care. Bye.
Bye now.
Oh, I have one more question that just popped up.
Oh.
Homegrown vegetables better than store-bought vegetables?
That's hard to say. The soil, do you have good soil? You know, most of the time, here's what Dr. Greger says, because some people say, well, what we used to eat at grandma's time versus now is probably a little less nutrient dense, not quite as many nutrients. That may be true. His response is eat a couple more bites. It's so little, you know, that, in other words, I would say it's good to grow your own vegetables because you know that they just intuitively we know that it's probably better. But if they did research, it could be that your soil isn't quite as good as, you know, Farmer Joan who provided it, although you didn't have to travel far, and that is a factor. So I would say you do have an advantage. you don't have long storage times, you're eating it right away. Those are positives. But as far as how much actual nutrients in your tomato versus one that was, grown, and especially if you get it at a farmer's market, you're not going to find too much variation. But grow your own. That's a real good thing.
Definitely. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.